Welcome to the Fogwood Files, where fog lingers among the trees and the forest holds its secrets close. The Canadian Maritimes are a land of silence and shadow, where pasts dissolve into mist and voices echo without a source. Here, beneath the canopy of pines, people have witnessed things they cannot explain. Their words remain as fragments of a larger mystery, stories carried through the woods like whispers in the dark. Tonight, we open one of those accounts and step deeper into the ledger of the strange.
Case File 015, Deadly Dogman. Date of encounter, April 1986. Location, Minto, New Brunswick. Report submitted, March 2022.
I'm writing this report because I don't want to carry this weight with me to the grave. 40 years of silence is enough, I think. I told myself I'd never speak of what happened in Minto, New Brunswick that night in 1986, not because I didn't want to, but because no one would have believed me. And those who might have believed me would have tried to lock me away. Back then, a serving member of the RCMP talking about a monster tearing through a home and killing an entire family was a quick route to a psychiatric evaluation and a suspension. Hell, even now my hands shake thinking about it. I am 71 years old as I write this in March of 2022. I've been retired from the RCMP for nearly a decade, and most of my old colleagues are gone, moved, or buried. The world has changed so much since the 80s that I suspect even the strangest truths barely raise eyebrows anymore. People are more open to the paranormal, the inexplicable, and the things that slip between the cracks of conventional explanation. Maybe that's why I feel like I can finally do this and not be on my deathbed. Back then, Minto was a quiet coal mining town whose best years were already long behind it. Surrounded by forests, bog, and long stretches of crown land, it was one of those communities where everybody knew everybody, where front doors were often left unlocked, and where real crime barely existed. You had to look hard to find trouble in Minto, at least that's what we all thought. When it started with missing pets, nobody cared. A couple of cats here, a few dogs there. Some folks shrugged and blamed coyotes, even though coyotes hadn't taken a pet inside the town limits in years. But then came the livestock losses. A few goats and pigs torn up in the ways that the local farmers couldn't explain. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, just shredded animals and blood soaked into the frosted earth. Even then, I didn't care enough. I figured it was some large predator passing through, something hungry, maybe desperate. I filed reports, sure, but nothing in those early weeks suggested what was coming. Nothing pointed to the nightmare crouched in the shadows of Minto's backwoods, watching us, learning us, getting bolder by the day. But the night I responded to that wellness check, the screams, the gunshots, the home torn apart like paper, that night changed everything. It burned something into my mind I've never been able to forget. I still dream about the window shattering as it burst through, still hear the low growling that vibrated through the floorboards, and still smell the copper in the air. People deserve to know the truth. Or maybe I just need to let it out before I die. Either way, this is the account I should have written in 1986. And this is the full story of the Minto Dogman incident, told without the edits, the lies, or the excuses that I was ordered to use. To understand the gravity of what happened, you need to understand the world in which it occurred. Minto in the mid-80s was a relic of an earlier Canada, slower, quieter, a place where the most exciting thing on a weekend was a hockey game or the bar at the Legion running out of Moosehead. The coal mines that once sustained the town had mostly closed by then, leaving behind slag heaps, abandoned tunnels, and a population split between the stubborn and the stranded. The young people were leaving, the old folks were dying, and those who remained were hard workers who'd seen enough hardship to take pride in small comforts. The land around Minto was patchwork of dense woods, bogs, half-forgotten rural roads, and tracts of government-owned forests. In those days, radios didn't reach everywhere, and a man could walk 5 minutes off the road and vanish into trees so thick they swallowed sunlight. I was one of only 3 RCMP officers stationed in that area, a corporal and 2 constables. My days were spent dealing with speeding tickets, break-ins by bored teenagers, domestic disputes, and helping lost hunters. It was so predictable it almost was peaceful. Honestly, I don't mind the boredom. Those were the kind of postings that made careers easy and retirement straightforward. Locals trusted the RCMP implicitly. Folks waved when we drove by, offered coffee if we stopped on their property, and gossiped more readily to us than to their own friends. I suppose that's why the first reports were brought to me directly. People thought the outsider with the badge should be the only one to handle it. The missing pets started quietly enough. A few posters on telephone poles. Some elderly residents knocking on my office door to ask if someone might be stealing cats. I shrugged it off and blamed the foxes. Everyone accepted that. When the livestock killings began, the farmers wanted someone to blame, and I tried to reassure them that we were looking into it, even though none of us really were. I remember one farmer telling me the wounds didn't match any predator he'd ever seen. Not wolves, not coyotes, not even a bear. These weren't bites, he said. These were tears. Something ripped these animals apart with hands. I dismissed it, of course. What else could I do? But I wrote it down in my notebook. That detail would haunt me months later. The woods around Minto always had an eerie quality, especially at dusk. Locals told tales of strange shapes in the forest, glowing eyes, howls that weren't wolves. I chalk it up to rural folklore. You hear enough stories about phantom miners and black dogs on the slag heaps, and you grow numb to them. Still, some nights, especially the colder ones, when I made my patrols, I'd catch glimpses of movement between the trees. Something tall, something silent. I'd hit the high beams and whatever it was would melt back into the darkness. And then the screaming started. The first screams were reported by a teenager walking home from a friend's place just outside of town. He told me he heard something that didn't sound human. Something long, drawn out, and angry. I tried to comfort him, but he was trembling so badly he could barely hold his cigarette. A few nights later, a hunter reported finding claw marks gouged in the side of his shed. Marks higher than his head. He thought it might be a bear. I didn't argue. 2 weeks after that, another farmer called saying he found hoof prints in the dirt, but embedded beside them were deep impressions, shaped like elongated paws. Way too big for any dog. He said something had been circling his barn. When he'd opened the door, he swore he saw a tail-shaped duck into the tree line. Again, I blamed a bear. Again, I lied. It was subtle at first, but the fear in town grew like a rising fog. People stayed inside at night. Kids were kept home from playing in the woods. No one walked dogs after dark. Even the old-timers who claimed they weren't scared started carrying shotguns. One of those old-timers, a man named Stewart, came to my office one morning in March of '86. He was a trapper, a man who spent 50 years in the woods. He set a heavy bag on my desk and told me to look inside. It was the rear paw of something dog-like, but oversized, broad, with long curved claws. The flesh was tough and bones thick. His trap had snapped shut on it, but whatever creature it belonged to had torn itself free, leaving only the severed appendage behind. "What the hell is this, officer?" he asked me. I didn't have an answer. He said the tracks around his trap were bipedal, 2 legs, heel impressions, toes like a person but longer, wider, and the stride was enormous. I wanted to tell him to calm down, but something about the look in his eyes made me swallow that lie. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't hysterical. He was frightened. That was the first time I felt a knot of dread settle in my stomach. Yet, despite everything, life continued. People worked, ate, slept, and tried to pretend nothing was wrong. Rural communities are good at pretending. Survival sometimes depends on it. But no amount of pretending prepared me for the call that came on April 12, 1986. A frantic neighbor reported the screams, 3 loud gunshots, and then silence from the home of the Rogers family. Quiet, hard-working people who lived on a property near the edge of the woods. I was the closest unit. I arrived alone. And everything changed. The Rogers property was dark when I pulled up, except for the exterior light above the front door swinging wildly in the wind. Their truck was in the driveway. No one came out when I announced myself. No dogs barked. Not even the crickets made noise. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, I saw the first sign that something was terribly wrong. The front door was cracked open. Splinters lay scattered across the threshold. I radioed it in, stating I was conducting a wellness check, then slowly pushed the door open. The inside of the house was a disaster. Furniture shattered, drywall ripped open, pictures knocked off the walls. The living room looked like a tornado had passed through it. There were drag marks on the hardwood, long, messy streaks of blood leading toward the kitchen. The metallic smell in the air was overwhelming. "Rogers family, RCMP," I called out. No response. I moved deeper inside. The kitchen was worse. The table broken in half, appliances dented. The back door no longer attached to hinges, just laying twisted on the deck outside like it had been punched off. Then I saw the blood. Thick, smeared across the floor, splattered on the walls. Far too much to be anything but fatal. My pulse hammered in my ears, but training kept me moving. Something upstairs thudded, heavy, slow, deliberate. That's when I heard the wet, tearing sound. I raised my service pistol and stepped toward the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The house felt wrong, like something living and ancient was crouched inside it, waiting. Halfway up, I smelled it. Rot and meat, something feral. At the top of the stairs, the hallway lights flickered. To my left, the master bedroom door was half open. And that wet tearing continued. I nudged the door gently with the barrel of my pistol. At first, all I saw was the shadow. Then the shape shifted. A massive hunched form crouched over something on the bed. When my eyes adjusted, I saw a long canine snout rise from the torn remains of what had once been a human torso. Blood dripped from its muzzle in thick ropes. It turned toward me. Yellow eyes, reflective, intelligent, hateful, locked onto mine. The creature stood. It unfurled. Its back scraped the ceiling. Long arms ended in clawed hands. Its entire frame was covered in dark, matted fur, except for the chest, which was stretched tight over muscle. Its legs were digitigrade, like a wolf's, but thicker, more powerful. And its teeth, God help me, its teeth were made for ripping, not chewing. For a second, neither of us moved. Then it roared. I fired, once, twice, 3 times. The bullet struck it, but instead of dropping, it staggered and snarled. Then, in one explosive motion, it lunged past me, smashing through the bedroom window, sending glass spraying everywhere. I ran to the window in time to see it land on all 4s, shake itself, and sprint into the tree line. It moved like a nightmare, fast, impossible, silent. I stood there trembling, gun smoking in my hand, staring into the darkness where it vanished. That was the night my life ended as I knew it. By the time my backup arrived, I had already forced myself back into professional mode, radioing statements, clearing rooms, confirming the scene was secure. But inside, I was barely holding it together. My body shook, my voice faltered, my mind replayed that roar again and again. The corporal looked at the carnage and turned pale. He asked what happened. I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out. My brain couldn't form the words, dog-like humanoid creature attack them. Instead, I told him what I could without sounding insane. There was something in the house. Something big. He pulled me aside. How big? I looked at the shattered window. Bigger than a man. He didn't like that answer. Statements were taken, photos were snapped, but the deeper the investigation went, the more the higher-ups intervened. Suddenly, Fredericton HQ sent people down, men in suits I didn't recognize. They ordered us to remain silent about certain details. Claw marks, tracks, the way the bodies were found. They brought in a wildlife specialist who barely looked at the scene before muttering, "Mountain lion." A mountain lion. In New Brunswick. Inside a house. Breaking down a door. Standing upright. Devouring a family in their beds. It was insulting. They might as well have said swamp gas. Later that night, my corporal sat me down in his office. He closed the door and poured 2 cups of coffee. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said quietly. "I know what you saw wasn't a mountain lion." I froze. "But if you say anything else," he continued, "they'll evaluate you. Possibly suspend you. Possibly worse." I didn't speak. He leaned in closer. "I believe you saw something unnatural. I believe you're shaken. But for your sake, for your career, you're going to write in that report that the suspect was already gone when you arrived, and that the evidence supports a cougar attack." I felt sick, angry, betrayed, but also terrified. I knew what I saw, and I knew no one, would believe me if I tried to file the truth. So, I signed the report. I wrote the words I was told to write. Mountain lion attack. Scene consistent with large predatory animal. Suspect not seen. And that was the end of it. At least officially. Privately, the nightmares started immediately. For the rest of my service, I avoided that stretch of woods whenever possible. The Rogers house was eventually torn down, but the land sat empty, choked with tall grass and silence. Locals whispered for a while about something evil in the woods, but without evidence, and with the RCMP insisting it was a cougar, the stories faded. But not for me. Every night, for years, I dreamt of those yellow eyes, that roar, that blur of fur and claws bursting through the window. I found myself jumping at noises on patrol. I triple-checked locks at home. I stopped hiking. I stopped hunting. I stopped sleeping properly. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the uncertainty. I didn't know where it went. I didn't know if there were more. I didn't know if it watched me those times that I felt like I was being watched. I started researching on my own, not officially, just late night reading. Every culture has stories of upright wolves, dog-headed men, creatures that stalk the forest and steal livestock. Dogmen, they call them now. I didn't have a name for it back then, but seeing modern accounts online, sketches that match what I saw, stories eerily similar to mine, makes me feel less alone. Less insane. But knowing others have seen them also means the world is less safe than I once believed. The woods around Minto are endless. Thousands of acres where anything could hide. And the creature I saw survived 3 gunshots, a leap from a second-story window, and a sprint through thick bushes without slowing down. It didn't die that night. It ran. And who knows how far it went. Age has a way of softening some memories and sharpening others. The older I get, the more certain I become of what I saw. Trauma can distort details, but it doesn't create creatures where none existed. I've replayed that night thousands of times. The height, the posture, the hands, the glowing eyes, the intelligence, the way it moved. No animal behaves like that. No hallucination leaves claw marks a foot deep in hardwood. No delusion eats an entire family. I've asked myself if I could have saved them had I arrived sooner. Maybe. Maybe not. The gunshots the neighbor heard must have been from Mr. Rogers. He must have seen it, must have tried to fight it. I don't blame him for losing. I've also wondered whether my silence contributed to someone else becoming a victim later. Maybe my report, my lie, prevented the right people from being alerted. Maybe the creature found new hunting grounds. But back then, I had no choice. I needed my job. I needed my sanity, and I needed the world to remain explainable. Now, I no longer care about my reputation. I no longer fear suspension. I no longer need to lie. I know what walked in that house. I know what stared at me from across the bedroom. And I know it wasn't an animal. It was something older, something predatory, something that knew me, something that recognized a threat and fled only because it chose to. Dogman, werewolf, rougarou. Call it whatever name your culture gives to the thing that stalks the tree line. I call it real. If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to put these words on paper. I didn't expect anyone to believe me, and I wouldn't have believed my own story if I hadn't lived it. But I want this on record somewhere, anywhere before I die. Not for fame, not for validation, but because the truth deserves a place in the world alongside the lies. In April of 1986, in Minto, New Brunswick, a family was killed by a bipedal wolf-like creature. I encountered it inside their home. I fired at it. I saw it leap through a window and vanish into the forest. The RCMP covered it up. I signed the report, and I've regretted it for decades. Minto has grown since then. New families, new homes, new people walking the same forest trails the Rogers family once lived beside. I don't know if the creature ever returned. I hope it didn't, but deep down, I fear it did. Creatures like that don't pass through. They stalk territories, they patrol ranges, they observe, and they remember. I'll never know why it didn't kill me that night. Maybe I surprised it. Maybe the noise scared it. Maybe it already got what it came for. Or maybe, in some twisted way, it was curious about me the same way I had become obsessed with it. If anyone else has encountered something similar, I hope this report gives you strength to speak. Silence only protects the monster, not the people. And if the thing I saw is still out there, I pray to God someone braver than me finally exposes it fully. But for me, this is enough. I've told the truth. I've purged the lie. If this is the last statement I ever make, let it be this. There are things in the forests of New Brunswick that no man has a name for. I saw one. I survived it. And I will never forget it. End of report.
This report submitted by the Fogwood Files. Another account pulled from the fog and preserved in the records. If you'd like the next story to find its way to you, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll be here when the next fire is lit. Until then, stay close to the firelight, because in the woods, you're never truly alone, and something is always waiting just beyond the glow.